Hello, everyone. Derek Floyd here, Beautiful Now Podcast. Welcome to another edition of Beautiful Now Live. Now, this is the segment where I interview special guests to talk about things that are topical, relevant to you, your family, and your community in your daily life. And if you enjoy this type of content, do me a favor. Right now, pause, stop, and hit a like or subscribe to the channel. And also hit the little bell that notifies you when the most updated content is available. And most importantly, if you enjoy this type of content, share it with a friend. Now, today's topic is going to be rather interesting, and we all kind of feel this issue with the word failure. When you think of failure, what do you think about? What comes to your mind? Is it all negative? Do you feel like I can never accomplish that thing, like it's just the end? But today's topic is going to talk about how failure is actually a positive. Failure is actually something we can move forward toward. And a lot of successful people will tell you failure is part of the process. Fail fast, they say, or fail forward. And today's special guest, I have two young ladies that are part of an amazing company called Failure Lab. And they're going to give us insight about how failure can change your daily life if you can institute it and see it in the right perspective. So will you please help me welcome my two new friends from Failure Lab, Anna and Chrissy. Are you guys there, guys? Hello.
We're here. Hello.
Hey, the crew is here. We finally got everybody on the same call, right?
Exactly.
It took us a little while, but we made this happen. Thank you guys for taking the time to talk to us today.
Of course, we're happy to be here.
Awesome. As I said in the beginning, Failure Lab is a brand new take on how people perceive what failure really is. And you guys have begun a whole new organization about this thing. So we're looking forward to hearing what you guys have done. The first question right out the gate is, I'm going to read it just so I don't get it wrong, right? Failure Lab's unique style of innovation and creative thinking has been everywhere. I mean, you guys have been on Fortune, USA Today, NPR. Where did the program find its genesis, so to speak? How did you guys get started? Anna?
So Failure Lab began probably almost 10 years ago now, 9 or 10 years ago. And it was sort of a spin-off idea from a TEDx experience. And so everybody on the team are avid TEDx fans or TED fans. And in Detroit, about a decade ago, Detroit was going through a big renaissance of business and art. And the Detroit TEDx is a really excellent event that's been going on for many years. And the founder, Jordan, was at that event, and there were a lot of really great speakers. And then somewhere in the middle of the event, somebody came onto stage and was like, I've been listening to all of these stories of inspiration, and I had something planned for you all, but I've decided to scrap it, and I'm just going to tell you about all of the ways that I've screwed up. And all of the things that I've done wrong in my career and life. And he proceeded to tell the story, and the room was silent and everyone was rapt with attention. And it was just a really different experience. And what ended up happening is that in the course of telling this story, the storyteller became emotional and had to step off stage. And it was just like silence in the auditorium. And then he collected himself and he came back on stage and he sort of wrapped up and I said, I'm great and everything's fantastic. And, when Jordan was contemplating it, he was like, that was so powerful. It was one of the most powerful stories I've heard. And it was better before he came and wrapped it up. And so that's sort of how the concept of the Failure Lab format came to be. So not only is it about being truthful and transparent about failure experiences, but it's also the format of the story is very specific in that there aren't morals or wrap-ups at the end. And the reason we do that, it seems very counterintuitive, but the reason that we do that is because it allows for everybody that's in the listening audience to sort of do their own meaning making around what that story means for them or how it relates to their lives, or it puts them immediately into that, well, what would I have done in that situation? And it elevates the level of empathy that the audience has with the storyteller. That is really the magic sauce. Like that is what makes Failure Lab different than any other storytelling platform. And it's what really gives us that entry point into a deeply epic experience.
Wow, wow. Because when you guys sent me first the link and I watched a couple of them, I kept waiting for the punchline. I kept waiting for the
Yeah.
moral to come in, and then I'm like, holy crap, it's not supposed to be on there. And it took me a second to realize that wasn't going to be there. So as I listened and I got involved with the stories, I thought, wow, this is so emotional. And I'm thinking, where do I go
Mm-hmm.
from here? And those are the kind of stories you want to watch with people in the room or something, because you want to be able to share
Yeah.
what happens next, or at least dialogue about where that could go or how that's applied to you, right? It's kind of how you look at it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. We're kind of not in live event land right now, but the live events are really magical in the sense that the energetic feel of the space is so shared. And we actually put a clock on the wall for 90 seconds after the storyteller for people to sit and sort of contemplate and draw conclusions and share with each other or with us
oh
through
wow.
various social media, and then we always have a performer that's sort of like a palate cleanser for everybody to sort of gather
Mm,
themselves and start fresh for the
wow.
next story. Like,
People don't realize the power of silence. You
Right.
guys have caught that because then you drop something in a silent mode and everybody has to go, there's this moment where
Feelings.
you have to do something and you're like, and it's powerful in that moment, right? So just knowing that, I can imagine how those rooms are probably pretty powerful after a storyteller has spoken. So thanks for
mm-hmm.
sharing that part of the story and how that began. Um, Chrissy, this question's for you. The
Okay.
theory of failure has been normally a negative attitude or emotion with most people. How
Mhm.
does the failure lab break this myth, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because now that I'm, kind of doing some work for them, and Anna kind of warned me about this, like, when people talk to us and want to bring us to their company or an organization, at some point in the conversation, they're always like, okay, we just need to figure out how to frame this for the team to get them excited because it's like failure lab. And when I talk to you guys, I feel really good about it, but like telling other people. So, I mean, and I think it's sort of connected to what Anna said, which is like the power of the live event is an opportunity to do exactly what you just said, Derek, which is like sit with the discomfort of just listening about failure and recognizing what it does in your body, what it does in your mind, what it does in your heart, and developing that practice of like normalizing and neutralizing it. And so what I found in like my short time in working for them is that it's like talking about anything interesting, right? Like once you crack the door about failure open and someone goes first to say like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get that job, or I just bombed that interview, or I just got a divorce, or I really had a goal in my CrossFit competition and I came in last place, whatever the failure is, or I messed up with parenting at bedtime. It invites connection, it invites empathy, it invites compassion, it invites lessons that don't even need to be stated. But I think like the willingness to kind of meet us where we're at and trust us in the process, if we can get people to that step, in my experience, what we found is that, the door sort of opens to a real practice around normalizing and neutralizing failure. And some people are really naturally good at it and others really struggle. But there's skills and practices that can help all of us. And so that's kind of like our pathway to entry on making it a little bit more palatable to talk about.
I get it, and well spoken, well explained.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's like yeah. Well, your storyteller approach though has been super successful for you. But why do you
Mm-hmm.
think people identify with a story rather than like an actual lesson from like a workshop? Like if you had to go to a workshop about failure and it would give you all these explanations, why do you think the storytelling is more effective? Which either one of you can grab that one.
Oh, we both could talk forever about this. Chrissy, why don't you go ahead?
Chrissy, give it to us,
You
girl.
know, yeah, I think, it's a little bit connected to your previous question, which is like, if we said we were doing a session on failure, I don't know how many people would show up. If we are doing something where we say people are going to tell a part of their story, again, you sort of get more people into the door. And, there's so much science around the ways in which our brains organize information around story, just sort of automatically, whether the story is reality or made up in our mind. And so I think the power of the live event in terms of like you think you don't want to talk about this and you don't want to do this, but you might want to listen to someone else's experience talking about it. Like that might be your entry point, is like, I'm not ready to talk about my failure, but I am willing to go listen to Derek talk about one of his. And so that idea of like, let's actually ground this in something. We all now have a shared experience that we can reference that has triggered some empathy and compassion and interest in us to talk about these things. It works for the same reason that, you know, TED Talks work and Brene Brown works. And we know that storytelling and the power of story is one of the most like meaningful experiences we can have, you know, on planet Earth as we exist as humans. And so it just taps into that sort of fundamental need of connection that when we're going along in our day-to-day, we can just zip right past. But when you can take like an hour and a half to go to this event and really listen to other people's story, it just does something. You're like, that could have been the guy I just bumped into at the grocery store, and I was annoyed because he like kind of cut in my line, but I'm like also an adult, but why am I annoyed? You know, like it kind of regrounds you.
That one.
You know what I mean? Like take it down a notch. Like we're all doing our best. And so you can't leave that experience without kind of having those reminders, which then gives us an opportunity to say, hey, there's some ways to navigate this in more graceful ways that's going to make your experience as just a person going through life more palatable.
So when they're at the event and they've heard a story and there's the silence, is there someone that comes up and begins the conversation about what that could mean, or where do you go from here? Or is it just left to the people that are in the room to decide what failure means to them in that moment? How does that come about?
Yeah, there's not, we don't wrap it. I mean, I think that at the beginning of the event, there's always an explanation of the event. So, you know, people that, you know, once you've been to an event, people love it and they keep coming back. But always at the beginning, we sort of explain what's going to happen. And then, you know, we invite it depends on the setting, but we invite feedback, like personal feedback on each story through either sometimes we give them a written, like a pen and a little packet, or sometimes they, you know, they'll tweet, or sometimes they'll go to a group page or something like that. But we love to hear what people think or how they process each story, because there are themes of similarity, and then there are like really specific things about, you know, memories and experiences that story triggered for a listener that, you know, might be quite tangential, or it could be exactly the same. So it's really interesting. And I think that it allows people to process with context, which I think is really important. I mean, I think back to your other question about workshops versus storytelling and learning how to sort of process another person's human experience, is that it shows you all of the things that are happening for a person, what they're thinking, because the stories are very carefully crafted around like what that individual's internal story was as they were going through that process. And those are things that we don't get to know. Like we can guess what people are thinking or what they're experiencing, but it's totally different for somebody to open up their brain and their heart and share with, you know, hundreds or thousands of people.
Right. I think that's amazing. You know, even going one step further, you mentioned social media, which is a big question of mine. How does social media itself play a role in what Failure Lab does as far as the response and moving the momentum forward with Failure Lab?
We love it and we hate it. I mean, like, I think that, like, we love it. We all love it, right? Like, yeah, I mean, we're never going back. I think that Failure Lab in many ways is a response to what our modern world is like. You know, that it's sort of a response to that feeling of everybody viewing everyone else's highlight reel and then comparing their life with all its ups and downs to the very best of everything that's shown on social media. I do think that social media on the plus side for us really lends itself to sort of that very real-time response of how people respond and react to things. And, you know, in the end, Failure Lab is really the basic, like, point is that we all want ways and tools for becoming better humans. And so, you know, that process of how quickly we respond and what our feelings are, and for us to be able to do that well, is super, super important.
Yeah, Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. And thanks for that explanation. You guys have seen so many different guests on the platform. I mean, tons and tons now. How do you find the successful people who are willing to share their failures, their tragedy on a stage in front of a bunch of people? That's not always something you want to do, but how does that work for you?
It's different. I mean, like you'd be surprised. Like some people, it's totally different. Like it's all different ways. As far as a lot of people, when we're working with groups, because we'll do public events, but we also do an event as a part of an experience for an organization, and that is really interesting. I think because there are a lot of sort of buzzwords that get thrown around right now around like leading with vulnerability and innovation and creativity and like synergy and like all these words, right? Like that are these words that people throw around in business land.
Just to make it sound cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they're really earnest too. I mean, like they're what we want, right? Like they're how we want to be and how we want to show up in our lives and in our work. To me, Failure Lab is sort of the how or the hidden stuff that's behind that, right? It's like that we can't have vulnerability without candid conversation, right? Like we can't have creativity without being willing to try things that aren't going to work. So it's like, it's the behind that piece. And so it's kind of the how of the shiny end result that we want.
Does your people gear itself toward young people, like younger than us? I mean, I'm older. I'm going to say I'm over the hill. I'm 50, so actually I'm 51.
Looking good.
So,
Looking good.
But
Looking
young,
good.
like 18, 19, 20, these young kids are coming out trying to deal with failure. I mean, think about when you were in high school and you didn't make the team or you didn't get that girlfriend or what, failure at high school was really deep. Do you feel like it could help young people at this space? Give me that one, Chrissy.
It's so funny because my career started in education and as a classroom teacher, and then the last 15 years have been in education. And recently someone reached out about sort of doing some things with GRP with Grand Rapids Public Schools here in Michigan with kids. And I have been, just as I immersed myself in this research, been thinking so much. I mean, I'm a parent. My son today just texted me from school on his last day. He said, "Hey, mommy, how are you?" I said, "I'm great. How are you?" He said, "I'm doing mostly okay." I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I'm like, okay, he's soft pedaling me into something. And he's like, I got a 72. He's like, I got a 72 on my math test and I'm bummed. And I was like, okay, like, do you feel like you studied as well as you could have studied? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well then we need some math help. Let's talk when you get home. And I don't know if I would have responded that way if I hadn't been completely immersed in, like thinking about this stuff all day, like, what the hell, dude? Like, we don't get C's in our family, and so I think there's actual research about how to develop growth mindsets, how to celebrate failure, how to acknowledge, feel feelings. Like you can be bummed. We're not going to skim right past that. We're going to like extend some compassion. We're going to process it. We're going to learn from it. You're never in 5 years, the 72 isn't going to be something you think about probably, or it will as a lesson, And so there's so much cool research about the ways that parents or teachers or, important adults in kids' life can talk to kids as they hit these bumps, because to your point, they feel huge. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, to him, getting a C- is a really big deal today. He might as well he's extrapolating that he can't get into college in 6 years. You know what I mean? Like he's off to the races, And so how do we talk about how that happened? If it's like I did my best and I got a C, then okay, I mean, is it a fail or is it a win? And so those types of conversations and how parents and educators can help usher kids through those experiences, I think can be really powerful.
That's awesome.
And I think like we talked about before, it's super intense right now for them.
Yeah.
I mean, Chrissy and I both have sort of pre-teens, like early teenagers. And I think it's more intense than it was for us because they're so inundated with information and conversation all the time. I mean, I don't even we didn't even know how to have to beep another person into a phone call on your phone. You know what I mean? Like they're in these conversations.
It wasn't even there.
Yeah. All day long with 12 of their friends, right? Like, so they're constantly getting bombarded. And so in some ways that's how they connect, but also there's like so much opportunity for judgment and comparison in that space. I think we're just, because our kids are right at that age, Chrissy and I. So like we're just now like starting to like feel that for real.
Good luck with that. I've been there.
Yeah,
done
exactly.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
My kids are all grown.
Oh, jealous.
It's a tough, and that's why I brought the question up. It's a tough time, like you said, and you said it perfectly. The time that they live in is completely different than the time we lived in. They've got social media pressure. They've got this smartphone screaming at them. They're not good enough. They're not smart enough. They're not this enough, that enough. And they're looking at people's highlight reels on Instagram, thinking, "How come I can't be that?" Constantly comparing themselves, and then they feel like they're a failure. And so Failure Lab has to come into that place to say, well, not really. There's a line in that space that helps that out, Don't you think?
I think the intensity, it has increased because the speed of information and change has increased. But I would say that I think that the core emotional things that we're grappling with are the same in the sense that, when you talk to, we work with people of all different ages, people late in their careers, people early in their careers. And like you were saying, like one of our core exercises on the training side is to spend a good deal of time talking about definitions of failure. And so and that we assume that we throw these words around and we all mean the same thing, but we don't. And so especially for internalization of experience, people are very different on like what things influence how or in what way they're comparing and judging themselves. And so just having space for that conversation, whether it's with a 12-year-old or with, a 57-year-old, we've had pretty profound and sort of aha conversations with people in that whole spectrum.
Wow. And do you think men and women respond to failure differently? And how does Failure Lab address that?
Oh, yeah.
She says, oh, yeah. You don't understand. Who's going to take this one? Because somebody's excited about it.
Chrissy. Let's let Chrissy do it.
I think you might know this, Derek, that we're about to run a group for women in leadership positions over the summer, starting June 23rd, little plug. And so this has been a lens that I have really like spent a lot of time thinking. And when Anna and I kind of like brainstormed it, we were like, do all of the like amazing women who who are just like kicking ass, like in outward, like we think that, do they like, don't you like always feel like your friends are like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing this, I'm not that. And we're like, yes, like women and failure, there is a unique relationship there. And there's a ton of research that supports this. So like, starting like at like our current age or in this zone, it's like, we know that most women, if they fail at something, internalize it to mean I am a failure, right? So if I don't get a job, it's because I'm not good enough. If I don't get married, it's because I'm not worthy enough, all these things. And men tend to say like, if they fail a test or something, wow, like that was harder than I thought. Or they're like, oh, I guess the job wasn't for me. They don't internalize it the same way. And that tends to be the ways in which we're conditioned and raised and praised and criticized from early, in our childhood. So boys tend to get praised and feedback when they succeed around effort. Effort if they fail, right? So they get praised for their effort when they fail. And if they succeed, they get feedback around their ability. Girls, if they succeed, get praised for good behavior. And if they fail, get feedback on their ability. So from an early age, this growth and fixed mindset tends to get in the language of the adults who are praising us or giving us feedback. And then when we become adults, we sort of reflect that back out when we hit failures. And so we know that it feels differently. And then in addition to that, women, research shows, are judged more harshly for their failures in the workplace. So if you do a study and you have a woman cop and a male cop, and you're given the exact same, scenario to participants, they more harshly judge the female cop. So we are navigating a set of things, especially in the workplace, that men primarily by and large are not. And so navigating how to sort of like undo some of that bad conditioning, undo some of that learning, undo some of the internalized perfectionist tendencies that many of us have been conditioned to believe. All of that sort of intersects with our relationship to failure in a way that's just different for most men. And again, I'm speaking in broad generalizations, but the research does kind of play out in that way.
And all this is addressed in the new program, correct?
Correct.
Of course, I saw it.
Yeah.
So give me a little breakdown of when you already did the plug, but I was gonna say it anyway.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to hear about, and I wanted the subscribers to hear about what is accessible to the ladies out there. Anna, give me a little bit more about what she is going to address there.
Well, Chrissy did a really good job of talking about sort of what the inspiration for She was. I mean, this is really, if you take Chrissy and I outside of Failure Lab, this is the most common thread through our entire career, is sort of the development of female leaders and minority leaders. And, anybody that's not sort of in that primary demographic is, how do you navigate the world as it is and do everything that you can to be successful in the way that the world operates, but then also to how do we work to change that system and also care for the people that are actually doing the traveling. And so I think that Chrissy says this thing that I think is so true, is she's like, you can't talk about failure without talking about identity. And because how we identify and all of the things that make us who we are, each individual, all of the things that have molded us from birth to the systems and society that's around us, that dramatically impacts how we judge success or failure, from very, very small things to very, very significant things. And so I think that, there's so much around just like having space to unpack all of that. And it's not necessarily about finding finite answers, but again, equipping people with tools to be able to navigate well, and have as much awareness as possible of all of the things that are happening around them and inside of them, so that you can feel like you're more empowered to be able to make good decisions for yourself.
I love it. That's a lot. That's a mouthful, right? So all you ladies out there that are listening to this, there's an answer, or at least a discussion you could be having with Failure Lab about where to navigate your own personal failures and how to see it in a different perspective. That's awesome.
And just support in that space. I think that's incredibly important. I think that it's interesting, like, to go back to what you were talking about before around, like, sort of people do have strong reactions around just sort of bringing up the idea of failure. And so sometimes we've had situations where people are like, we totally love what you do. It's exactly what we need. But all we need you to do is change the name.
Wow.
And we're like, so maybe you're just not ready yet. Like, maybe you're not ready. A real conversation around that. But then the flip side is true as well, is that it's kind of amazing. We go into these situations with rooms full of strangers, and if you can create a safe environment and a framed environment around, like, what we're going to discuss, it's like this invitation to talk about something that you're not really invited to talk about very much, right? In a positive lens, in like a productive lens. We're not asking people to complain. We're not asking people to, just like unload their dirty dishes. But like it feels like,
I like that
but
term.
It's like people will just open up. It's incredible. It's incredible. It's like, things that they are holding inside them that they would like to be able to talk about in a safe space with no judgment. And it's just like, it happens very quickly.
I was just thinking, sorry.
Go ahead, Chrissy. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of, like, why affinity spaces work in DEI trainings, which is like, when I made a post a couple of weeks ago to sort of promote She, and I just gave like some broad facts around, how certain women need to feel before they will apply for a job before a man, promotions within organizations, women in leadership. I just put like facts, and I was just like, this is some bullshit. Literally, that's what I said. And people, like, women just commented like, oh my gosh, this is me. How do I sign up? Yes, me. Yes, I feel this. It was women who, they're the only 2 female principals in their entire district, or they're the only female on their executive leadership team, or whatever the thing is. And when you're in it, it's really easy to talk yourself out of like, I'm probably just feeling something that's not there. Like, it's me, and women especially, right? Like, we can internalize, like, maybe I'm being too X, Y, and Z. But it's like when you put the plain facts out and other women jump in and they're like, me, and so I think there's power, in addition to some of the like tools of self-reflection and like unpacking some of this conditioning and giving them skills. There's also power in being with other awesome women who are in similar positions of leadership, navigating the same shit that you are. And so the power of that community works because you don't have to worry about what you're saying because you're not at your workplace. You're not with other, you're with a group of people who really get what you're saying. So it works. Yeah.
Well, and the sidebar question I just wanted to make sure I ask is that, we hear failure like fail forward, fail quickly, fail fast, to get you to your success part. Does Failure Lab address that part of failure as well?
Yeah, I think that absolutely. I mean, absolutely. It's about how to do it in a healthier, better way. Also to destigmatize the idea of it. And so I think that that's one of the things that is sometimes missing from the fail forward, fail fast. It doesn't normalize the failure, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So so I feel like there's two pieces, right? It's like we have to understand how we perceive failure and how other people perceive failure, and failure being a synonym for not just like an acute situation, but like feelings of stress, feelings of overwhelm, like all of these things that are just a natural state of being human. Like these are things that happen, right? And they're a part of how we process and live and learn. And it's not negative inherently, it just is. And so that's the thing I think that's missing from some of the other messaging around failure. Yes, absolutely. Fail better, right? Fail forward, fail with a more positive lens to yourself, right? Fail with more compassion, like be more compassionate to other people's failures. But also let's talk about like, what is this stigma around failure? What is this stigma around, all of the things that go into how we engage in the world, right? There's like what we are, there's what the world is, there's how the other people are around us, all of these things, right? And so what do we have control over? What do we not have control over? And this is all just normal and human.
Sure.
I was going to say too, one of the things that Anna created that just from a person who designed some of the content has been so awesome is she's created this little like assessment that participants take. It's called like the archetype. So there's 6 of them, and it sort of lays out the different ways in which people respond to failure. So I'm just going to give you 2 keywords, and I think you could probably, so like I'm a happy denier, right? So it's like, you don't even need to know what that is. You're like, that seems right for that lady. But like, it is almost hard for me to name what a failure is because my brain quickly is like, well, but like I learned that, or like then I got that because I didn't get that. Like I just skip right past it. There's another archetype that's an obsessor, right? Yeah. So again, you don't need a lot of language there. Those people, everything feels like a failure throughout their whole day, and it's hard for them to talk their way out of it. And so this idea of just failing forward and like fail and then learn a lesson, and like you don't have to let it slow you down, like that just isn't true for everybody. It is true for some people, and I don't even need to read the book because I could write the book. And then there's someone who can't even access, they can't even access the message in that book because what they don't understand yet about themselves, or they don't have the framework, which is to say, what does failure feel like to me personally? It's going to be different for all of us. So before we talk about how we fail forward and past it, let's talk about how we approach failures and like how we orient to them. And so that I think is like such an important piece that's also missing from that like fail forward message, which I personally do govern my life by. But in facilitating sessions on failure, I'm learning that does not work for a lot of people. It is really not that simple at all. And for me, I'm consistently like, like you couldn't get on our Zoom and you were sitting in your house feeling like you didn't deserve to be on our call. Like that is mine. You know what I mean? But that is really what that person did. And every time it happens, I'm like, wow, it must be so hard to be in your day all day, and the person's like, help me, So I think that part of failing forward and just like, where do I even begin? If you ask people, what is your relationship to failure? They don't really know what to say. And so I think Anna's assessment gives them like, once they get their little report, they're like, now they just need like, a microphone and they're ready to talk about what it feels like because they have language. So that's been awesome.
Wow. Well, you guys have been amazing. This is the last question. I try to keep the interviews to 30 minutes. We've gone a little bit over, but hey, it's been fantastic. No, I love it. I love it. You ever notice people's attention span is only so short? You can only give them so much.
So true.
They blank out. And a lot of your storytellers are like 20 minutes, right?
It's
So
shorter. We try to
so
keep
you
them
guys,
really
so you
short.
guys get it. You only
Yeah.
got so much
Yeah.
time. So, so here's my last question. If you could share one thing that you feel like encompasses the Failure Lab message to someone who's never heard about failure, what would that one thing be? Anna, first.
I think that the most important piece for me is the idea of acknowledging and understanding that there are ways to be uncomfortable and to be better at being uncomfortable, and that all the good stuff is on the other side of that, right? Like all of the most profound conversations, all of the best work is on the other side of being uncomfortable. And so if we can get better at that, the whole world opens up for us.
I love it. I love it. And Chrissy, your turn. One
You,
more thing you would
you know,
say that
you know what?
encompasses that.
That was so close to what I was going to say, but way better stated. So,
She's like, I'm done. I'm gonna leave it right there.
I'm not going to overtalk. Yeah, I think that was so close to what I was going to say, but better. So,
Well, to both of you, thank you for coming on the program and sharing about Failure Lab. I hope the people that have been watching are saying, okay, how can I address failure? I'm going to look up this Failure Lab program and get involved. We want people to be able to be encouraged that they're not alone, that we all go through these things. And life is, I tell my kids, life is not linear. It's all kind of directions. And when you just think it's one way, you're in for a big shock because it's never going to be just straight. So, failure teaches us it's left, it's right, it's up and down, it's all over. And that each turn is important. Each space is necessary.
That's the stuff that makes it good.
Yeah, each one's a lesson. So it's good that you guys are going to talk about that in the program. So if you could tell them how to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of Failure Lab?
Super easy, failurelab.com. It's not even hard to spell.
So just failurelab.com. That would be the information right there. And they can get the assessment there as well?
It's not available publicly. It's part of our training curriculum right now. So we have been, I know, we've been working on it. I do think that this is probably something that needs to happen relatively soon, is like a mini version of that, so that we can get it to everybody.
Because then people will be able to take that test and go, okay, well, I fit here. I better join the program to go and learn about this. It's like an open door to get them to understand where they start from. So you definitely got to do an open door for that.
People do love it. They love the assessment.
Well, I appreciate it. And it is open to businesses, companies, schools. It's open to everyone?
Yep, it is.
Well, awesome, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of the program today. We appreciate you stopping by and talking to the subscribers. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
And for everybody watching the program today, I sure do appreciate you being a part of the Beautiful Now Live podcast. It was an interesting one, talking about where failure can land you, and that this program is going to look at it from a completely different perspective. If you had a moment to share it with a friend, click that share button. If you didn't get a chance, hit the like and the subscribe. And as always, we look forward to seeing you at the next Beautiful Now podcast.